Well, welcome back to another episode, another session of the 7th grade painting project. We've been, as you can see, making significant progress. Yesterday's session, although it doesn't look like we got a great deal done, we did. We painted in the front of our last building on the right side of the street, and then carefully went and started with this building, and we painted in the black part of the roof, and then we went across the street and back across the street, and then these little 3 ones, and then this one right here, which we finished off with yesterday. So now, in an attempt to get as much of the painting done as possible, so we can finish this up in a couple more sessions, I'm going to move to some of the larger areas to give us a greater sense of completion. And the first area would be, we're going to use some brown, and we're going to paint this mountain in the background in brown. I am going to remove the large part of my kit and grab a slip sheet so I can protect my work as I paint, and I will attempt to, if it's not in my way, to leave up the paint colors that I'm using there. Now remember, these will go from red to black, and then here these 2 colors are very difficult to distinguish, especially on the projection screen, but this is blue, violet, purple for most of you would say, and this is black on the far right end. Alright, so as much as I would like to leave my billboard up there, I probably will anyway, because that just tells people what my theme is. I can't go abandoning it now that I've... So make sure your brush is clean. When you're using a watercolor kit that another class may have used, you're going to have to just assume that it may be left filthy. And then clean out your brush so you don't get any strange pollution. I'm going to put a little bit of water, just a drop, on the end of my brush and stir this around, and then I'm going to start at the top of the mountain, and I'm going to work my way downwards. If you have marks left behind by the paintbrush, then you will want those markings to overlap each other in an upside down V fashion, so it kind of appears as though you're going from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain. Then it will look a little bit more, gives it more motion. I better put this down so I don't mess up my painting. It gives it a bit more sense of motion, and it leads the viewer's eye along an area you want them to look at. Okay, let's see. That's it for the brown mountain right there. Okay, let's go ahead and keep on. So I'm trying to just get the edge work here. And trim it in so that I can paint a little more freely. Okay, so it's a technique I like to use myself. I don't necessarily say it works great for everybody, but as you can see, if I'm going to overlap the brush marks with the paintbrush, then I'm going to want to make it appear as though those overlapping brush marks go down the mountain rather than squirreled kind of all sideways and just scribbled in. So we just continue to work to stain our paper carefully with the lightest pressure on the tip of the brush, working our way down the mountain. Now the important thing really is to get good results more than it is to, work fast. Just because I'm working fast on this video doesn't mean that it's possible for most students to keep up with this rate of production. But this is a demonstration. It's not meant to be an actual duplication of the classroom experience, I suppose. But it's pretty close, because this is how I would be painting with you in the actual class. And so you can actually observe how I make the marks with the paintbrush, and you can see how much paint I actually use. Instead of just, flooding the color cell there with a bunch of water and making a big runny mess in the paint kit, you can probably see I'm using very little water, in fact. When you see me kind of go off screen a bit, that's when I'm picking up some water. Like right now, I'm getting a little bit of water, touching it on my paper towel, and then, as you noticed, I didn't dig a hole or try to melt out the entire compartment of paint in the kit. I'm simply just using the finest point of the brush and keeping it loaded with paint. And as a result, I get pretty good control results with that. So again, sometimes, strangely, as the paint melts, it soaks up a lot of the water, and so it seems counterintuitive, but you may have to use your brush needs to be pretty well rinsed out and have some water still in it in order to, the more you stir the paint up, the thicker it becomes. And so it's just kind of counterintuitive that you would think that as you make the watercolor painting, you may have to actually use more water, because your paint in that paint cell, that little compartment in your paint kit, becomes very pasty and has to be thinned. So that's how kind of paint works a lot of times. It absorbs the thinning agent that's going into it, and it develops a pasty consistency. Alright, so you've probably been noticing I'm always trying to keep this paint moving until I get the texture that I'm looking for in the appearance. So once the watercolor gets melted a little bit, you can really get expressive results out of it, and get really very good control. But when the paper is also wet a little bit, because it gets wet from the action of painting on it, it allows you to just manipulate that color a little bit more and just kind of continuously melt it down and spread it around a little bit until you get the result you're looking for. Once it's dry, it's very difficult to do much of anything with. So we are painting as usual in the wet next to dry technique here, so it gives us the greatest amount of control at this particular level. There are times that painters, especially a little bit more experienced painters, will paint wet watercolor into existing wet watercolor, and that's usually to get floral effects or some sort of a fading effect, tinting or shading of some sort like that, variegation, so it looks like flowers or the sky or a natural looking field of some sort sometimes. So how you handle the paint, there's a variety of ways to handle watercolor paint. We're simply using what gives you the most accurate and consistent results. My experience as an art teacher has shown me that if students don't get good results, especially if they're attempting to follow the directions carefully, then they will really dislike a project. So I've tried to create the projects in such a manner so that you will get good results if you follow the directions and you do your best. I can't guarantee what kind of results you will get if you don't do that, but I can pretty much guarantee if you follow these visual and spoken instructions, and also pay attention to what has been said in lectures and on your notes, everything that we talk about during those lectures and in those notes is in your projects. And so that's something that doesn't often become evident to students until we are in the middle of a project and they hear me for the 100th time say something that was in the notes, and then they put it together. So being a middle school level art teacher, a lot of people say I repeat myself a lot, and they would be correct, because there will always be a rather large proportion of the people you're trying to communicate with who will not be paying full attention, and so they have to be told many times. Okay, let's trim around our sign. If you put a sign in there, and whatever the theme is for your town, I tried to keep it just very simple. Not all the jobs, but numerous of the jobs I've had. Some I liked, some were fascinating. There's things in there I didn't even put in there. I was a contracting officer for the United States Army for a while, And that was one of the most fascinating jobs I ever had. And I was still a member of the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers at the time. So it could be included loosely with the piece of equipment there that I'm currently painting around carefully. But that was a fascinating job. We would buy all kinds of crazy stuff for the government and for the Army and for the Air National Guard and the Army National Guard. It was a neat job. We would also purchase construction services, what we called then environmental remediation services, which is if there had been some pollution by a military outfit somewhere, we would have that cleaned up, and we would have contracts for local businesses to be able to try to come and bid on that. So it was really fascinating. Massive roofing projects, massive construction projects. Sometimes not so exciting stuff like buying, pretty much 1 million rolls of toilet paper. So, sometimes it was really fascinating, sometimes it was more humorous, but I guess that would be included, excuse me, in my jobs during my military time, I suppose. That's a nice line right there. So you can notice I'm not really trying to rush through this. Most students don't have this level of patience. But if you're looking to get the good results, you have to be patient. Watercolor is not the easiest of the paints to use. But it also it teaches you exquisite control with the point of the brush, right where all the business is done on a paintbrush. And it also teaches you really focus when you're trying to trim around very fine objects. Alright, so I'm feeling pretty good about this painting here, because I am focused and I am taking my time, and I'm more interested in good results than I am speed of production. Now there is, of course, with every project, there is a deadline hanging out there somewhere, so you do need to be able to get your projects done in the amount of time that is allotted for them in class. Okay, but this is coming along quite nicely. It looks very natural. Okay, we'll go on now we're over dialing it in on above the art camp there. Okay. Same over here on the other side of the Washington Township Recreation Center flag, where we conducted our art camps. And we had other camps too. They weren't just all art camps. There were people that went out for sports camps where they would go and actually see excuse me, pro sporting events. They had another outfit called the Caravan Camp. You never really knew where you were going to go from one day to the next. You just got on the bus and went there. That was very popular. So it was always like an adventure each day. Where are we going to go today? No one really knew. I didn't participate in that. I simply knew it was there. Then we also had something called Outback that was more about crafts and camp activities. So you'd spend the whole day, making camp crafts or learning about how to camp. Not at the art camp, but actually camping out in the woods. And so they'd do things like that, field craft, I guess we'd call it. So if you ever went legitimately camping, you'd kind of know what you were doing out there. It was a fascinating time to be involved in that particular program. And then later on, I would actually take some ceramics lessons, pottery lessons, from one of the ladies who taught pottery at the Washington Township Rec Center. And she went on later to become one of my graduate school advisors when I was attempting to get my master's degree, and helped me write my thesis about pottery and all of the things that I had not learned during my time as a bachelor's degree student at Wright State. And I was an art student, but I never took any pottery classes when I was at Wright State. I was much more involved in the two-dimensional arts, meaning mainly painting, printmaking, graphics, photography. I did do some sculpture, but I just didn't do any pottery and ceramics. In fact, I still have several sculptures around my house that I really quite like. Alright, well, I think this is coming along pretty nicely, as a mountain should go. And it looks pretty mountainous, like the way the paintbrush markings are overlapping each other is really quite attractive. So I'm going to finish this up and we'll move on to the next thing here. I'll turn around my sign. Alright. So that variegation there, that overlapping marks with the paintbrush, and the lighter and darker areas that are in it, really can add to the natural effect of what you are attempting to express to people. And I want them to understand that this is a mountain, and I'm going to say I'm pretty much getting that effect from it. It seems like a mountain to me. It's got light areas and dark areas in it, and it seems like it moves from the top toward the bottom instead of some other strange direction for some reason or another. Okay, and as you can see, my paint is not soaking wet with a puddle. It's simply just got a very small amount of water causing it to be just wet enough that I can move it around and with precision. And I'm also not using, you know, a big soggy brush. I'm really only using the very finest point of the brush in order to make these markings. Now, see, that is very dark brown paint, and in order to make it look attractive, I'm going to have to break it down, move it around, so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb from its surrounding color. Okay, see, that's not so hard to do. And it seems like it was always meant to be that way sometimes. So let's finish this up and move on to the next mountain. Now we got to paint this mountain, would appear, all the way down next to the tunnel. If there's a space down there, like there is past my yellow building, then you should definitely paint that in the color of this mountain. Keep at it, and that's how this gets done. It's just a long, sometimes frustrating, sometimes experience, but it is also worth the effort to do it, and you get good results. And I'm pretty happy with what's going on so far here. So this is kind of a washy effect, meaning it's kind of watered down. The paint is. It's a little more transparent. So in our notes, we did, that was one of the things that we covered in the painting notes, was the concept of different ways to apply paint. And the wash is one of those ways. Now, when you want really good control, it's a lot of times a good idea to put the paintbrush up against the object and then paint away from it, so that you don't accidentally slop paint into the very thing you were trying to keep from painting, at least at the moment. So I'm putting my paintbrush right against the edge of the tunnel and then moving the brush away from it. And that kind of gives me a little bit more security, so that I don't, slop it in. I'm not painting toward an object I'm attempting to protect. Okay, so I'm going to say that looks pretty good for a mountain so far. So let's rinse out our brush, and we're going to go to another color now, and that color is going to be violet. And so if this one in the middle here, it pretty much is blue, the one to the right, not the brown, just to the left of the brown. So it's between blue and brown. This one would be violet. So we're going to take our violet, and I've already rinsed out and cleaned my brush, melt a little bit of it, and we're going to place this into the mountain on the left. And the reason for that is simply because it looks good, and furthermore we've got some violet right here, but there is no violet on this side of the picture. And so in order to have a little bit of color balance, that's why we're doing this. So make sure you protect your painting, and then we're going to start our violet colored mountain over here. Now if you've ever been out west, and sometime when you get into Nebraska, it seems like you start seeing these mountains way off in the distance, and they literally are purplish colored simply because of the distance from them. Furthermore, they're purplish colored because of the atmospheric conditions around them and the refraction of light. So when people ask me why I put purple mountains in there, that's why. Plus it's also a painting, so it looks good. So some people are pretty uptight about these things. And it's in the song America the Beautiful as well, which is a great song. So there's the answer to that question that has been asked of me many times. Okay, now I'm going to have to trim around my little road there and just keep moving that violet paint. I want it to look as though it goes down the mountain, right? So this project now has been going on for not just the painting portion of it, but if you consider the drawing portion of it as well, it's been going on for a few weeks now, hasn't it? And so it's sometimes a good project can take quite some time to finish up. And if we were in the physical classroom, it would probably take more time than it's been taking in this video, to be completely honest, because we have to go around and correct people's work, give them advice, keep them on task. Okay, so I'm doing alright. Once again, I keep saying it, but it bears repeating 1,000 times, is that you only really want to work with the very, very finest point of the brush. And that's how you get this kind of control. And I'm using simply the brush that came with the watercolor kit. And I've also used this brush to make the 6th grade painting and the 8th grade painting with too. So I don't want anybody to think I'm doing all this particular magic with some sort of specialized paint or a really, really quality brush that somehow or another has a magical quality to, keep me from messing up. It's really just an experience. So somebody who knows what they're doing with paint could probably paint with almost anything. Alright, so my purple mountain is looking pretty good there so far. So I'm going to melt me some more violet and continue on with it. Now these mountains appear to be farther away, right? Because they're smaller, but it seems like this one on the left is slightly taller than the brown mountain, right, that we just got done doing. So now we got to be very careful about putting wet paint up to next to wet paint. In this case, I think the brown paint in the first mount should be dry by now. So a little road going up the mountain here, I'm going to leave that in there to make it gives people a sense of motion too. They look back at that and they follow that road visually up the mountain. Wonder where it goes. Well, it goes around the top of the mountain there. Where does it go? Alright, see, now this is coming along quite nicely. And it looks very natural and attractive. Alright, let's see what we're getting on the projection screen there. It's looking pretty good. So, back to the water. A little bit more violet. And just more of the same. So I hope y'all's projects are coming along nicely here. If you're fortunate enough to have your own watercolor kit, that's fantastic. If you don't, and you're having to somehow borrow one or use alternative materials, well then you just have to struggle by the best you can and do your very best. This particular technique wouldn't work real well with certain types of paint, so it really is, the whole project is designed for watercolors, and so you may struggle with it if you don't have your own watercolor set. Although they are inexpensive and can be gotten relatively cheaply at almost any dollar store or Dollar General or Family Dollar, or you can get them pretty much anywhere. And I think they're only a couple, $3 per kit. But look at all the fun you can have with $3. Alright, so I'm about ready to get this mountain done here. Then we go to the other mountain, and we can move on to other things after that. So, you would have thought you could paint an entire mountain in just a few minutes. 2 mountains, in fact. Now, it's a good thing that these are just pictures of mountains. Painting an actual mountain would be problematic. You would have to calculate how much paint you would need. I would imagine it would take a great deal. So this kind of overlapping markings from the paintbrush really enhance the whole natural look of the mountain itself, because it would have areas of it, if you want it to look like a real mountain, you would have to account for areas of it that are lighter and darker in real life. So there would be shadows and highlights on the mountain and areas of, dense forest and other areas of less dense forest on some of these mountains. And so it would look variegated, not necessarily one uniform color. So yeah, we're coming down to the end of the quarter here if we're working on this painting. And I hope you've had a good experience in art class. This whole e-lesson series has been fascinating to produce, and also it's good for using as a class resource, and also for students who miss school when we're back in the physical classroom. So I believe it's been worth the effort to do it. I've had to make over 100 videos in order to present my lessons in this manner. And so I'm hoping that my voice will hold out and we'll make it to the finish line on these projects, and everybody will have a positive experience with it all by the time this is all over with. But the design, drawing, and painting units have all been really quite successful so far. with this technique. So I'm just going to keep on persisting with it and see where it takes us. Alright, now my paintbrush got a little bit wet, a little bit splotchy there, so I'm going to kind of drag around some of this additional pigment that I've picked up there and put it on other parts of the violet that have started to dry a little bit, so I can get that kind of changes in tonality of the violet paint so it looks more natural as a mountain. It's a natural object. Okay, now that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna probably just leave that alone here in a moment. Okay, so we've got our purple mountain on the left, brown mountain in the middle. So now we're going to go to the mountain on the right that's just above the smokestack over here in my pizza place, and we're going to color that mountain in green. So rinse out your brush and pick up a little bit of green, and it's looking like this mountain is going to be rather small anyway, at least in the way, the manner in which I drew it in. It may be larger in your particular painting, but it really stands out against that blue. And if you've been working hard to keep your colors from, melting together and polluting each other, then you should have a pretty vivid painting by now, meaning the colors are really bright against each other if you're following the colors that I'm putting down. And I have done this particular project many times, and this is just kind of how it has evolved over many years to come out being, a totally refined project, rather than something we're making up on the fly, which is no way to make art projects up. You have to really think these things out. Especially when you're the person, the teacher, the person conducting the instruction. Alright, so Green Mountain is looking nice and green and natural. Okay, so it's just something that takes some time and patience. I wish I could explain it to you in a different way, but that's pretty much how it is. Now I'm starting to notice that at some point in time I'm going to have green touching green over here, but it's very minor, so I'm going to bet that no one will really even notice it. But that does kind of bother me, because when you have two colors that are exactly the same color and they touch up against each other, what happens is that everything blends together and you lose that three-dimensional effect sometimes. In this case, it's probably not going to make a huge difference, I don't think. But I've been wrong before. So. Alright, now that smokestack there is really kind of popping out against that green background too. When you have this really kind of tight control, the images are really, really vivid the way that they stand out against other images in the background which are different from them. So the black roof stands out vividly against the green mountain, and the green mountain stands out vividly against the sun and the sky in the background. And our oven vent smokestack there for our pizza ovens and the pizza place stands out brightly against the green background, and also against the black of the roof as well. So I'm pretty satisfied with the effect I'm getting here from this. You got to be careful not to snag that black. Even though it's dry, the brush is damp, and that wetness in the brush will snag some of that black and melt it and pollute your green. So you always got to be operating with the serious amount of caution and prudence when you are painting watercolor like this. Alright, that's what we've got for now. That looks pretty good, I must say. Now, let's begin our next requirement. And the next thing we're going to do is paint in the gable ends of the buildings. These ends of the buildings here, 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 and here. Whoa, that was wasn't expecting that. So here's how this has to be done. The student gets to pick the color. However, that color can't be any color which it touches. So let's go to the pizza place, for instance. This gable end of the building can be any color you want it to be, except a color which it touches. And in this case, it can't be blue, it can't be black, can't be black, can't be green. So it can be anything but blue, black, or green. I would advise against using something like violet, but there's no reason why you couldn't. And since to me it says pizza, I guess it should be red, or it should be yellow, or a combination of those things. Maybe even the color of the sauce, you know, kind of an orangey color. So I guess I would go with orange in this case if I had to. I could even use brown, and that's a color that rarely gets used. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go with brown, and then we'll just continue this in the next session. This will be the last thing that we do today, but we'll continue it in the next session. Okay, so I'm going to use brown. Just go around my pizza there, carefully, making sure that I don't paint over the pizza. And also, I want to be very careful about not snagging any of the black paint, which if I did with a wet brush, it would melt it just a bit, and it could pollute my brown color here. So got to be very cautious when painting up next to another color, even if it is a color which is currently dry. So you just got to be cautious about these things. A watercolor painting can easily be messed up. I wouldn't call it ruined. I've seen people actually dump the entire cup of rinse water out on it, somehow fix it. But those are really, really gifted students. Alright, so this session is about to come to an end for today, but we've gotten a lot done. We've got the mountains painted in. We've begun the gable end of the building here. So we're getting what I think on my painting is good results. Now, I'm not so sure how you feel about your own painting, but if it's looking even remotely like what you see in the demonstration here, then you're doing a tremendous job. If on the other hand you don't even recognize what you're painting, well, somewhere along the line something has gone. And so I think that's going to be the end of our session. So I'll talk to you at the next session, so have a nice day.